Welcome back to Afternoon Express. Now, according to the Journal of the Geriatric Society, it was found that women who had their last child after the age of 35 had sharper cognition and verbal memory. They also found that women who had their first child after the age of 24 were better at problem solving than their peers who had children before the age of 24. Now, Dr. Lindi Murray is here to share some more information of the pros and cons of having children later on in life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I can't believe that it's the geriatric study.
No, isn't it depressing?
It's so depressing. It makes you feel old. Now,
does.
this is always such a difficult question, and a conversation, I suppose, for women to have. Like, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have children yet, and like my best friends are forcing me to go and have my eggs frozen and stuff. Why are women having children later on in life?
Well, I think from a personal perspective, it makes a lot more sense to have your children later if you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, when women are younger, women are still studying, getting established in their careers. You know, there's a lot to be said for still having your time be your own and having time to travel and all the rest. They may not have found the right person yet. And I think being older with children, you are probably a better mom. You have a better sense of your own identity and probably are more settled.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the better time, unfortunately, as much as we'd love to believe that it is.
So from a gynecological perspective, when does it start becoming later for you to have a child?
Well, that's where it becomes a bit depressing. So we would consider an older mom to be one at 35. So at 35...
That's still so young.
I know, it is. So at 35, the risks start to go up, and then by 40, the risks, or the chances of falling pregnant, fertility mainly, takes quite a big drop by age 40.
Okay, so then what are the risks? Like, why does it become harder or more difficult or potentially dangerous to have a child then after 35?
So I think the biggest thing is fertility. So if we were to put it into some simple stats, from about 35 onwards, we lose about 5% fertility every year.
So what does that actually mean? Are you physically losing eggs?
It's not that we think that they run out, but it's just that they're biologically aged.
They're getting fraught.
Yes. So you might be 40 with lots of eggs, but they just don't behave like they should.
Yeah.
So when you're in your 20s and your early 30s, for every cycle of trying to fall pregnant, every woman has about a 1 in 4 chance. Okay. And that's why we have about a 4-month average time to fall pregnant. When you're 35, it's a 15% chance every cycle. When you're 40, it's about a 5% chance every cycle. So those numbers are quite scary.
I don't know why any of my friends in their late 30s are panicking about, like, what's it, contraception? Girl, you don't need it.
But I mean, that said, there are still a lot of women who are older having babies, but the numbers are not on your side, but biology sometimes is. I mean, it's hard to say.
I mean, for women that fall pregnant much later, like I'm talking in their late 40s, can they carry a baby as effectively as a younger girl? What are the risks then?
So the biggest thing, and I think from a medical point of view, the biggest thing to speak about is that there is a much higher risk of miscarriage. Okay. And a lot of that is from chromosomal problems, and Down syndrome is obviously the big one. So the risk of miscarriage for women in their 40s can be as high as 1 in 2, 1 in 3, and I think that's the big worry. But for the rest of pregnancy is a little bit more difficult, but it depends on your overall fitness. I mean, there's a young, fit, healthy 40-year-old, and there's a 40-year-old who's overweight with lots of problems, etc., etc. Some issues are more common, things like blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. And then women who are pregnant for the first time in their 40s sometimes have more difficult labours. They may be more likely to have a Caesar, things like that. And of course, it's easy to look at the pregnancy, but you have to look forward. What happens as your child gets older and you go with trick dances and all the rest, and obviously you get older with your child. So those sort of things to look at. Yeah.
What other risk factors are there involved with falling pregnant later? And I'm talking about in your late 30s, early 40s, because then that doesn't seem too old.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we see a lot of women who are pregnant in their later 30s, and I don't think you should the take-home message shouldn't be that I'm going to have a baby late, I'm going to put myself in mortal danger. Yeah. That's not the truth. The truth is that there might be more inherent risk. You might need to see your gynae more regularly. You know, things might happen that you may not have expected or might not have happened had you been younger. Okay. That said, a lot of older women do fall pregnant easily and have very uncomplicated pregnancies. So there's pros and cons. You need to think about all sides of it.
What we have seen, though, is women who, even though physically it's a little bit harder to have a child later on in life, emotionally it seems like a much better alternative or option. Why is that?
I think it's simply, as Judy was saying, I think people are just better. I think we are better when we're older. I think we're more settled, we're more independent, we're more patient, maybe have a little bit more wisdom. And I think good social and support circles, and I think those things play a very big role.
Yeah, that is important.
And also women who are pregnant later, who are pregnant, are often very much more planned and expected and anticipated than younger women sometimes.
Yeah, because statistically, I mean, how different is it from the olden days, like 50 years ago, where women were having children younger? Are much more women having children a little bit later in their lives?
So they are. So if you look at overall worldwide fertility trends, overall worldwide fertility is going down, probably because of contraception and women making life choices, etc., etc., except in the over 40 age group, where fertility in those women is actually on the rise.
Wow. And why is that? Just because that's when, you know, better planned parenting, that kind of thing?
It's probably twofold. It's probably women, there's simply a trend of delaying pregnancy. There's also, I mean, delaying, women are getting married older, all of those things going together. And also, we are much more advanced now than we used to be when it comes to fertility treatment.
Yeah.
So a lot of women where pregnancy may not have been an option can now fall pregnant with help at an older age, into their 40s.
So what I've heard is probably one of the biggest red flags in having a child a little bit later is fertility.
Yeah.
So then what options do women have in fertility as they get older?
So I think, unfortunately, the truth of it is if you are expecting or anticipating having children late, you actually need to plan ahead. So sometimes women only ask themselves the question when they are 40 and go, oh, hang on, I want a child. But actually, it's a question to ask 5 years ago. So I think having a very honest discussion with yourself to say, listen, when am I likely to have a child? And if it's likely to be at 40 or older, to make provision earlier.
Yeah.
So that I think comes first. Keeping yourself in good health, fit, good stable weight, not smoking, all of those sort of things will help to maintain youth and fertility. Visiting gynae regularly, making sure there are no gynae issues that should be addressed.
So many girls don't know this, and I feel it's so important because I chat to young girls all the time, and a lot of young girls don't realize how often you need to go for a pap smear. You need to go once a year, no?
Yeah, you should be seeing your gynae once a year. Pap smear sometimes a bit less frequently, but at least once a year to see your gynae or have some sort of feminine checkup.
I know some girls who haven't been in 10 years.
No, absolutely.
You have to go once a year. It is so vital because for things like cervical cancer and other issues that you may have that will affect the rest of your life if you don't go to the doctor. Yeah.
So often we see women who come into the practice and they say, you know, I'm 40 years old or I'm 38 and I've put off having children, and now they're at the gynae for the first time and now they've got a problem. That may not even be fertility related, fibroids or endometriosis or whatever, that we could have actually addressed. So now you can't help with fertility and that's on hold till you sort something else out. So I do think that you need to be at a gynae regularly and make sure that you're in your best possible health.
But options that young girls have for fertility, so there's freezing your eggs. What other options are there?
So there's freezing eggs and there's freezing embryos.
What was that?
Freezing embryos.
Okay,
so
what's the difference between freezing an egg and freezing an embryo?
So embryos is actually when you get eggs from an IVF sort of type cycle with sperm, actually do the whole process and then the embryo is frozen. Now that's the one that's been around for much longer and has a better success rate.
Because it's already fertilized, hey?
Yes, but you need the sperm, so you need to use donor sperm. So if you're waiting for Mr. Right, then you may not want to use your embryos with donor sperm from 5 years ago. So, but that's the one option. And then egg freezing is slightly newer, where the eggs are frozen for use later. The problem is it's age dependent. So the earlier you freeze your eggs, the more successful those eggs will be for pregnancy later. So doing it for the first time in your late 30s isn't necessarily a good idea. So that's why although we can do it, that's why you really need to plan ahead. So it's facing those discussions head on and sort of being honest about them.
Oh, I really hope that we've helped the older girls that are watching the show. Thank you so much for this conversation. It really is an important one for women to be having. Thank you very much for sharing all your information with us. So we're going to be continuing the chat with our amazing guests after the break.